Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York-based jazz bassist Teymur Phell. We asked him about his new 2019 CD called Master Volume. So he was born in Baku, Azerbaijan, to a very musical family at the age of 13. He started playing the bass guitar, studying music with his father, and trying to figure out his way around the instrument. He would go on to the Jerusalem Academy of Music and make his way to New York City in 2011, building a reputation as a very vibrant cat. So please get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
First of all, thank you for taking a minute out to speak with Neon Jazz. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So you've been at this for quite a while now. Your latest 2019 CD is called Master Volume, and I want to know from you, what was your vision for this project?
You know, this record is kind of, it's the album I always wanted to do. It's basically my debut record. It's all original compositions. It kind of brings together all the kind of different styles of music that I play, you know. So I got like, on one hand I have Mike Stern and Dennis Chambers on it playing, you know, some really funky electric stuff. On the other hand, I have some Azerbaijani influenced music and playing, you know, from my home country. So it's very eclectic, this record. And basically everything that I had, I kind of threw it all inside.
So let's get back to your beginnings of where you were born and raised. Talk to me about your home country and kind of how you got into jazz.
I was born in Azerbaijan, which was part of the Soviet Union. My dad is a musician, and his mother, my grandmother, was also a musician, big time actually. So I grew up in a musical home. You know, there was always music around, always somebody practicing, always going to concerts, that kind of stuff. But never, you know, when you think about a Soviet household, you know, it's usually, you know, 3-year-old child, 4-year-old child, you have a violin in your hand and, you know, they make you do it kind of. But in my case, it was really none of that. I was a regular kid. Nobody ever, you know, pressured me to play or any of that. So it was more, I actually picked up a bass when I was 13 years old for the first time. I think, you know, I was into MTV like, you know, most of the kids my age. And my dad, at this point, we're already living in Israel, so he just went by one day and he said, "Oh, that's a nice bass line." And I looked at him and I said, What is that? What's a bass line?" He said, "Oh, you know my friend so-and-so, he plays the bass? Well, that's a bass, so that's a bass line." And I said, "I want to play the bass." And he's like, "No, I know you. You're going to quit, so forget it." So I bugged him for like months and months and months to get me a bass. And finally he rented me this Fender Squire for a few months. And it was before he went to work. He said, "Look, this is a E, A, D, G. These are the strings. Right hand plucks it. Left hand, you kind of choose the notes." He quickly showed me how to play. And he went to work. And then by the time he got back, I was playing along with, I think it was Will Smith Getting Jiggy With It. I was already playing the bass line somehow. And he came home and looked at my mom and he said, "We're in trouble." So that was it.
Nice. So what kind of jazz records were you listening to when you started getting into the jazz realm?
Oh, yeah. I was right away listening to pretty much whatever my dad had, which, he had Oscar Peterson, you know, the Brecker Brothers, Bob James, that kind of stuff. So a lot of different things. And then at some point, you know, a couple of months after I started playing, he got me the Jaco Pastorius, you know, self-titled album. And I was like right away, oh, my God, this is how I want to play. And I was 13 years old. I heard that, and it was amazing to me. So, and then everything that you can think that would come along with these styles, Chick Corea, acoustic band, electric band, that kind of thing, Sonny Rollins. So, yeah, pretty much everything, because he's like a big jazz fan. He had a lot of records and a lot of, back then, cassettes. So basically everything that he had, I was listening.
So you attended the Jerusalem Academy of Music and then went on to New York. Talk to me a little bit about your education and some mentors and some real formative moments.
After high school, I went straight to the Jerusalem Academy, and I was playing mostly electric bass at the time. And I wanted to start playing acoustic, but there wasn't really like somebody super prominent teacher on acoustic bass that I liked or wanted to study with. And I didn't want to study electric privately. So I went to Professor Michael Klinghoffer, who's a classical double bass teacher, is one of the top teachers in the world, actually. And he's a former student of Gary Carr, who was a very, very famous solo upright player, classical. and we started from zero. And I was in the jazz department for the first year, studying classical with Michael, and then started playing the bow, started learning how to play upright properly from the beginning. And then by the end of that first year, I auditioned for second year classical, and they took me in, and I switched to the classical program, and basically spent the rest of my degree, 3 years, playing in the orchestra and just studying classical upright bass. So really focusing on that for 3 years. Still playing jazz, of course, and electric bass and all that stuff. And a year later, after I graduated, I basically just came to America on a tourist visa and just say, let's see what happens, and that was it.
So what was it like to get into kind of the mecca of not only jazz but music in New York City? How did you kind of get yourself into that world? How did things take off? How did you feel about it?
Yeah, well, it was amazing because sometimes I got to, people who I only saw on TV or on big festivals. In New York City, you get to see them, like in small clubs. So one of the people who I really loved listening to and I grew up listening to was Mike Stern. And I started going to the 55 bar on Christopher Street to check out his gigs. And I couldn't believe that he's playing in such a small place. There's like 40, 50 people there. And there he is, Mike Stern, I couldn't believe it. And I also started going to other clubs and playing with basically whoever I could find who wanted to play with me. I was down to play. It wasn't about money. It was, it was just about starting to absorb the city. It was quite different than Israel. And for example, after checking out Mike Stern at the club at the 55 bar, I walked up to him one time. I got some courage because I felt like I'm not too far. I felt like I could, I could be great for that gig. I felt like I would suit perfectly for that music and just my style of playing. And I just came up to him and I said, my name, is so-and-so, and, I would really love to play with you. And his response was great. There's a lot of people who want to play. I'm sure you're great, but, let's stay in touch. And it was like very, very kind of vague. And I kept coming every week because he used to play Monday and Wednesday at the 55. And I kept coming like 10 times. And finally he said, all right, like, I don't know what you want from me, Give me your number. I guess I'll try to call you. And I gave him my number, and he never called me. And then I came again a couple of weeks later, and he was like, this guy again, Jesus Christ. And he's like, okay, give me your number again. And I was like, this guy's never going to call me. And then he called me the next day. And he said, if you're free tonight, why don't you come over to my place and we'll jam? And that, the rest is history. And then we started playing. Yeah, and then I kind of started playing in his band, really paying my dues at the 55 bar every Monday and Wednesday night with him. Because before that, Anthony Jackson played that gig with him, and Richard Bona played the gig, and then I found myself playing that gig. So it was big shoes to fill, but it was great. It was like getting a master's degree in jazz without going to school, just by playing. And then we started going on the road, and that's the story with him. And later on, I hooked up with Arturo Sandoval, who's also one of my heroes, and he lives in LA. So I had something going in California, and I met him on that trip. And then after I got back to New York, about a couple of weeks later, he sent me an email and said, would you like to play with me at the Blue Note in New York City? I'm coming down. I was like, yeah, of course, no doubt. And I played with him for about a year, and then came back to New York and, kept doing my thing, kept playing with Mike and other things, played with Randy Brecker, recently with Randy and Bill Evans, actually. So I got to play with a lot of my heroes, a lot of the people that my dad had their records at home, when I was a kid. And I got to play with all these people, which is incredible. That kind of thing can only really happen if you're here, in New York. I mean, it really can't happen anywhere else in the world. And yeah, and at this point, basically, I always felt like, besides being a great sideman, I always had the desire to lead my own band, write my own music, and, be my own boss as well. And that's where this record comes in, Master Volume, and I'm putting the band together now, and hopefully going to go on the road and do my thing.
So what was one of the first jazz shows you saw live that really blew your doors down?
There was a couple. There was Ron Carter came with his band to Israel, and my dad took me to see it. It was amazing because, I had his book that I studied from, like Walking Bass Lines, and just to see him live was, he's a living legend. Dave Weckl came to Israel, and we went to see that. Kenny Garrett. So there's a lot, because basically any big act that would go on tour and stop at Israel, my dad made sure we had tickets. So he had a big part in opening me up to everything. He never. Everybody who came to Israel, there was a big name. We were there to check it out.
Right on. So why do you love jazz?
There's really no limit to what you can do. I mean, jazz is music that no matter how many people explore it, no matter how deep you go into it, there's always something new to do. There's always something new to bring to the table. And I don't think that will ever end. So I think that's the main reason.
You're releasing your first album. You've been in jazz for a little while. You're in New York City. How do you think jazz is doing health-wise in 2019 overall?
I actually think it's doing better than people think because, with the internet, which now with YouTube and everything else, there's so much. I mean, you hear 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old kids playing their asses off because the access to the information is, instant. Like, I remember that, my dad had to get like VHS cassettes and you couldn't really buy it and you had to find a friend who had it and we had to have 2 VCRs and copy the VCR so I can have a copy and then you basically had 2-3 VCRs and then cassettes and then CDs. You didn't really have a lot of the video information and also didn't have so much online teaching, online courses, online classes like you do today. I mean, I do some of those, like my music masterclass. I have 3 masterclasses on there where I, share the way I play, the way I think, and just, things should be done. You didn't really have that when I was coming up. So since everything has a faster access now, I actually think that jazz is doing better than before.
So everyone has a version or a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but you know yourself best. Who do you think you are?
I'm an artist, in one word.
I like it, man.
Yeah.
Brevity is always a good way to go with that. Hey, man, thank you for taking some time out for Neon Jazz and talking about your debut album, your life in music. I really appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Mr. Phell for his time, music, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at YouTube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.